Thief. Somebody get security. He's stealing my bag. The words cracked across the baggage claim like a struck match, and every head in Denver International Airport's Terminal C turned at once. Marcus Bennett didn't move first. He froze. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the voice, still gripping the handle of the suitcase he had just lifted off Carousel 11. The storm outside had grounded 3 flights that evening, and the terminal was packed shoulder to shoulder with exhausted travelers' seams, all of them's now staring at the tall black man in the plain gray hoodie and worn leather jacket, and at the suitcase in his hand. Marcus Bennett was 36 years old. He had grown up 2 miles from where his mother still lived, in a rented duplex on Colfax Avenue, and he had built from a folding table in a community college computer lab, a cybersecurity company called Solstice Systems that now protected the networks of 4 regional hospital chains, and had 6 weeks earlier closed a federal infrastructure contract worth $31 million. None of that showed on him. He wore the same gray hoodie he'd worn in college. His shoes were scuffed at the toe. The only thing on his wrist was a plain black digital watch that had belonged to his father. He traveled with one piece of luggage that mattered to him, a matte black hardshell case, industrial in design, with a reinforced steel edge frame that his engineering team had built for him as a joke 2 Christmases ago, because he refused to stop checking a case full of prototype hardware like it was a normal suitcase. On the bottom corner, there was a long white scratch from an airport ramp in Newark. He knew every mark on that case the way other men know the lines on their own hands. He set it down, extended the handle, and turned toward the exit doors, already thinking about the drive home to his mother's place, where she'd be waiting up with the porch light on, the way she always did when he flew in late. That was when the voice hit him. Diane Whitfield was 54 years old, and she had spent most of her adult life in a version of the world where her certainty was rarely questioned. She stood 5'4" in cream-colored slacks and a camel coat, her silver blonde hair pulled back in a tight knot, sunglasses pushed up onto her head, even though it was nearly 10 at night. She had flown in from a jewelry buying trip in Scottsdale, and she was tired, and her flight had been delayed twice, and somewhere in the churn of exhaustion and entitlement, she had convinced herself, in the space of 4 seconds, that the black case in the stranger's hand was hers. "Excuse me," she said again, louder this time. Stepping directly into his path, I said, "What do you think you're doing with my bag?" "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken," Marcus said. His voice was even. "Low. This is my case. I've had it for 2 years. "That is not possible," Diane snapped, her chin lifting. "I checked a black case exactly like that one in Scottsdale. You grabbed it the second it came down the belt, before I could even get over here." "Cases like this are common," Marcus said, "but this one's mine." He tried to step around her. That was his mistake, if it could be called one. Not stopping, not raising his voice, not doing anything but trying to walk away from a woman working herself into a fury over nothing. Diane lunged, her manicured hand slapping down over his on the extended handle. "Don't you walk away from me," she said, and now her voice had climbed into a register, meant to be heard, meant to gather a crowd, meant to turn a hallway of strangers into a jury. "Security. He's stealing my luggage. Somebody help me." The air in the terminal changed. It happens fast, that shift, the low hum of 200 tired travelers suddenly narrowing into a single focused silence. Phones came out of pockets before anyone even understood what they were filming. A young mother pulled her son back by the shoulder. An older man in a Broncos cap took 2 steps closer, arms crossed, already convinced of something he hadn't seen. Marcus did not raise his voice. He knew, with a clarity that came from a lifetime of learning this exact lesson, exactly how dangerous this moment was for him and how safe it was for her. "Let go of my hand," he said quietly. "Not until security gets here," Diane said, and there was something almost satisfied under the outrage in her voice. the particular thrill of a woman who has just been handed an audience. "Ma'am." "Diane, is it?" Marcus said, reading nothing, guessing nothing, simply trying to de-escalate. "Look at the handle, there's a reinforced steel edge. Does your case have that?" She didn't look. She didn't need to. Her story had already been written before he'd finished his sentence. "You people always have an excuse ready," she said. 4 words. 4. They landed in the middle of the crowd like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward, changing the temperature of everything they touched. A woman near the pillar visibly flinched. The man in the Broncos cap uncrossed his arms, suddenly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing, though he still said nothing. And Marcus. Marcus went very, very still. Pay attention to what he does next, because it is the only thing he has left that no one can take from him. He does not argue. He does not raise his voice. He slides his phone half out of his jacket pocket, in full view, so no one can later claim he reached for anything else, and he says, evenly, "If you don't let go of my case in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling the police myself." "You won't have to," a voice barked from behind the gathering crowd. Step back from her. Now. Officer Dale Kraft was 31, built like a linebacker gone soft at the middle, and he had exactly the kind of confidence that comes from never once having his judgment questioned by someone with the power to make it matter. He shoved through the crowd with his partner, Officer Renee Ostrander, a step behind him, her hand already resting on the radio at her shoulder. Kraft's eyes did the math before his brain caught up to it. Frightened white woman, tall black man, disputed bag. The equation solved itself in under a second, the way it always had for him. The way it always would, until something forced it not to. "Sir, let go of the case and step back," Kraft ordered, his hand drifting toward his belt. "Officer, this is my case," Marcus said, keeping his hands visible, his voice level. "This woman grabbed it out of my hands as I was walking away." "He's lying," Diane said, releasing the handle now that she had a man with a badge standing between her and any consequence, her voice cracking into a practiced sob. "He snatched it right off the belt. There's jewelry in there. My medication is in there. He was trying to run before I could stop him. I haven't moved 4 feet from this carousel," Marcus said. "I said let go," Kraft snapped, closing the distance, his face reddening. "I'm not going to tell you twice." Marcus opened his fingers and stepped back exactly 1 pace, close enough to keep his eyes on the case, far enough to give the officer nothing to escalate against. "I'm complying," he said. "I want it noted that this is my property, and that she assaulted me trying to take it." Ostrander stepped forward, eyes sweeping over Marcus's plain hoodie, his scuffed shoes, seeing exactly what she expected to see, and nothing else. "If it's yours," she said, "you won't mind opening it right here." "I do mind," Marcus said. "There's confidential engineering hardware in that case. I'm not opening a private case in the middle of a terminal, because a stranger decided to make a scene." Diane gasped theatrically. "See? He won't open it. He's hiding something. Arrest him." Kraft reached for the leather tag looped through the handle, the one with Marcus's name, and a private cell number stitched discreetly into the lining. He flipped it over. It was empty. The tag had been torn loose in the scramble, ripped clean off when Diane's hand had clamped down over Marcus's. "Tag's blank," Kraft said, and something in his voice turned smug, like a man who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle he'd already solved. "She tore it off," Marcus said, and for the first time there was an edge under the calm. "There's a camera directly over Carousel 11. Pull the footage. It'll show my case coming down the chute, me picking it up, and her grabbing my hand." "I did no such thing," Diane said. "He probably tore it off himself so no one could prove whose it was." Kraft stepped in close, using his size the way some men use size instead of reason. "I've worked this terminal for 6 years," he said. "I know what an entitled hustler looks like when he thinks a nice bag is going to earn him a payday. Open it, or you're leaving in cuffs." Marcus looked past the officer's shoulder at the sea of raised phones, at Diane dabbing at dry eyes, at the crowd that had already, silently, decided who the villain of this story was going to be. He thought very briefly of his mother's porch light, still burning 2 miles away, waiting for a phone call that told her he'd landed safe. "Officer Kraft," he said, reading the name off the badge, his voice dropping into something colder and steadier than anger. "I am the founder and CEO of Solstice Systems. My identification is in my left jacket pocket. I am not opening this case here to satisfy a false accusation, and if you detain me without cause, I will hold you and this department personally accountable." Kraft laughed, short and ugly. "Oh, we got a CEO in a hoodie," he said, glancing at Ostrander. "Cuff him." Ostrander hesitated. 1/2 second, no longer, a flicker of doubt crossing her face as she looked at the steel-edged case. At the calm in the man's eyes that didn't match anything she'd been trained to expect from a guilty person. And then she reached for her own cuffs anyway, because doubt, in that job, in that moment, was easier to swallow than defiance. They took him by both arms. He did not resist. He knew, with a certainty carved into him since childhood, exactly what resistance would cost him, and exactly what compliance would not protect him from. The cuffs went on hard, biting into his wrists, and Kraft walked him through the terminal in full view of 200 strangers, past raised phones and lowered eyes, past a little girl who tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, in a voice that carried further than she knew, "Mommy, why do they have him in the chains?" Nobody answered her. The holding room in Terminal C was a windowless box that smelled of old coffee and bleach, with a steel table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs that had never once been comfortable. Kraft shoved Marcus into one of them, hard enough to jar his shoulder against the cuffs, then dropped the black case onto the table with a heavy thud, like a piece of evidence he'd already convicted. "We ran your license," Ostrander said, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. "Clean record. Shame you're about to ruin it." "My record is clean because I don't commit crimes," Marcus said quietly. "Not because I've been lucky." "Drop the act," Kraft said, slamming a palm on the table beside Marcus's face. "The lady described the case exactly. Give us the code, we open it, and maybe, we go easy on you if the value's under the felony line." "You have my wallet," Marcus said, nodding at the pocket Kraft had emptied. "There's a corporate ID in there. A federal facility badge. Do I strike you as a man who needs to steal a stranger's suitcase off a conveyor belt?" Ostrander frowned. Just slightly, just enough to register that something about the badge had snagged at her. Before she pushed the thought away, the way people push at thoughts that would require them to admit they were wrong. "Anybody can print an ID," she said, but her voice had lost an inch of its certainty. "I want my phone," Marcus said. "I have the right to call counsel." Kraft smirked and reached into Marcus's jacket, tossing the phone onto the table before unlocking one cuff and looping it through a steel ring welded to the table, freeing Marcus's other hand. Marcus rubbed his wrist once, picked up the phone, and did not call a public defender. He scrolled to a name saved simply as Sloane, direct, and pressed call. It rang twice. "Marcus, it's nearly 10 at night." The voice on the other end was smooth, precise, faintly amused. The voice of a woman who billed $400 an hour and had never once needed to raise it. Marion Sloane was the managing partner of Sloane, Whitcombe Reyes, a firm that did not handle parking tickets or minor disputes. They handled federal contract litigation, corporate crisis response, and civil rights suits that had, on 2 occasions, changed state law. Solstice Systems paid the firm's retainer specifically, so that Marcus never had to wonder who to call. "I'm handcuffed to a table in a holding room at Denver International," Marcus said, his voice dropping the careful calm he'd held for the police. 3 seconds of silence. "Are you hurt?" Sloane asked, and every trace of amusement was gone from her voice now, replaced by something focused and cold. "Bruised wrists. Nothing worse. Yet. What are the charges? Grand theft. A woman named Diane Whitfield claims I stole her suitcase off the carousel. I offered to prove ownership without opening the case. They arrested me instead. Did they read you your rights? Marcus glanced at Kraft. No. Officer's name? Dale Kraft. Supervisors Renee Ostrander. Say nothing else to them, Sloane said, and Marcus could hear faintly the sound of a chair rolling back, a door opening, the sound of a woman already moving. I am 15 minutes out with a full team. Do not answer another question. Do not accept water. Do not sign anything. The call ended. Marcus set the phone face down on the table, leaned back as far as the cuff allowed, and closed his eyes. What'd your lawyer say? Kraft sneered. Tell you to take a deal? Marcus opened his eyes and looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, but sat somewhere cold and steady between the two. She told me, he said, that you have about 15 minutes left in this career. Kraft laughed. It came out thinner than he wanted it to. 14 minutes later, 3 Blackang SUVs pulled directly onto the restricted curb outside Terminal C, bypassing the barricades, meant to stop exactly this kind of arrival. Marion Sloane stepped out first, in a charcoal suit that had never once wrinkled under pressure. Silver-streaked hair pulled back. Eyes the pale, flat gray of a woman who had spent 20 years, learning that calm was more frightening than shouting. Behind her came Priya Anand, a junior partner with a tablet already glowing, and 4 more people moving with the quiet precision of a team that had done this before and would do it again. Waiting at the sliding doors, sweating through his collar, was Captain Everett Doyle, commanding officer of airport police, who had received a call from the airport authority's general counsel 9 minutes earlier, demanding to know why the CEO of a federal cybersecurity contractor was sitting in cuffs in his terminal. Miss Sloane? Doyle started, hands raised placatingly. I assure you we're sorting out a misunderstanding. You are not sorting anything out, Captain, Sloane said, not slowing her stride, forcing him to backpedal to keep pace with her. You have unlawfully detained my client. You have violated his 4th and 14th Amendment rights. You have subjected him to false arrest and racial profiling on camera in front of 200 witnesses. We had a complaining witness, Doyle sputtered. Priya Anand didn't look up from her tablet. Diane Whitfield, 54, lives in Cherry Creek. No registered high-value insurance policy on any travel item. 3 prior disputed liability claims against 2 airlines in the last 8 years. She looked up now, directly at Doyle. Your officers took the word of a woman with a documented pattern over a man carrying a federal facility badge. Doyle stopped walking. The color left his face the way water leaves a cracked glass, slow, then all at once. Where is he? Sloane said. It wasn't a question. The holding room door didn't open so much as it exploded inward, cracking against the concrete wall. Kraft jumped, hand flying to his belt on reflex. Sloane walked in first, took one look at the cuff still biting into Marcus's wrist, and the temperature of the room dropped so fast that even Ostrander felt it in her chest. Remove those, Sloane said. Who the hell are you? Kraft barked, puffing up out of habit. Marion Sloane, counsel for Mr. Bennett. Take off the cuffs in the next 5 seconds, Officer Kraft, or I will personally see to it that this arrest ends your pension, your house, and every year of your career you have left. Kraft looked to Doyle. Doyle nodded, hard, desperate. The cuff came off with shaking hands. Marcus stood, rubbed his wrist, and straightened, his full height suddenly filling the small room in a way it hadn't when he was seated and shackled. Marion, he said quietly. Are you hurt? She said again, scanning him. Bruised, exhausted. He glanced at the case still sitting on the table. And thoroughly done with this theater. Ostrander tried to salvage something. We were verifying ownership. He refused to open it. My client refused an unlawful search of private property, containing proprietary federal contract hardware, Sloane said, cutting through her like a blade through paper. You responded by arresting him. Since you are so eager to see inside, Priya. Priya Anand stepped to the table, set her tablet down beside the case. Mr. Bennett, for the record, please state your combination. 417, Marcus said clearly, loudly enough for the body cameras clipped to Kraft's and Ostrander's chests to catch every syllable. The latches clicked open, one after the other, in a silence so total that the sound seemed to echo. Inside, there was no jewelry, no medication, no silk scarf. There was a shock-proof server module the size of a shoebox, wired with fiber optic cable, stamped with the Solstice Systems logo. Beside it, 2 leather folders holding redacted contracts stamped with a federal agency seal. Beneath a foam divider, 3 folded suits and a single-framed photograph of a woman in a hospital cafeteria uniform. Smiling, a name tag, reading Dorothy Bennett pinned to her chest. Kraft's mouth opened and closed, without sound. It appears, Sloane said softly, and there was nothing gentle in her softness, that Miss Whitfield's jewelry has transformed itself into federal cybersecurity hardware. Remarkable. She was so sure, Kraft said weakly. She described a black case. A black case. Priya cut in on an airport carousel. Extraordinary detective work, officer. We had to act on the witness statement, Ostrander said, her voice thin now, all its earlier certainty gone. Priya turned her tablet around. This is footage from the camera above Carousel 11, pulled 11 minutes ago. On the screen, the case came down the belt. Marcus lifted it, calm, unhurried. Then Diane rushed into frame, grabbed his hand, tore the tag free in the scramble. The room watched it in silence, and something in Doyle's face collapsed entirely. Priya fast-forwarded 4 minutes. The crowd was gone. The carousel kept turning. A battered navy duffel bag with a pink ribbon tied to the handle rolled out. Diane Whitfield walked back into frame, picked it up without hesitation, and walked calmly toward the exit, never once looking back toward the room where a man sat in handcuffs because of her. She knew, Marcus said, and it was the first time his voice had cracked at all that night. She saw a black man holding something that looked expensive, and some part of her decided, before I said a word, that I couldn't possibly be the one it belonged to. She made a scene because she knew the system would believe her tears before it believed my truth. And then she just walked away, picked up her own bag, went home. Kraft stared at the floor. Ostrander couldn't look at Marcus at all. Sloane closed the case, the click of the latches sealing something in the room that could not be undone. Captain Doyle, she said, here is what happens next. My client is released immediately, and this arrest is expunged from every record that exists. My firm is filing with the Department of Justice regarding this precinct's pattern of profiling. We are suing the city. We are suing Officer Kraft and Officer Ostrander individually. And we are finding Diane Whitfield. Doyle didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. Marcus extended the handle of his case with a single sharp click and walked out of that room without looking back at either officer. And the sound of his footsteps down the concrete hallway was the only sound in the building for a long moment. Outside, the storm had thinned to a light rain. The 3 SUVs sat waiting at the curb, engines idling low. Sloane held the door for him, and as it shut, sealing out the flashing lights, still bouncing red and blue off the wet pavement, Priya's tablet was already glowing with the first draft of the filing. "Are you all right?" Sloane asked. Quieter now, the courtroom edge gone from her voice, replaced by something that had known Marcus long enough to actually worry. Physically, Marcus said, watching the blurred lights of the city slide past the window. But I keep thinking about my mother. She worked cafeteria shifts at St. Agnes for 31 years, so I could go to school instead of work nights. She used to tell me, if you ever get somewhere, they don't expect you to be. Act twice as calm as you feel, because you won't get a second chance to be believed. Tonight I found out she was right, and I hate that she was right. Priya looked up from her screen. which is exactly why we're not settling quietly. We already have investigators outside Ms. Whitfield's home in Cherry Creek. 2 miles from that home, Diane Whitfield sat in her kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea, the battered navy duffel half unpacked on her living room floor, humming faintly to herself, the whole ugly scene at the airport already folding itself into a story she told herself was justified. He looked suspicious. She was just being careful. The police would sort it out. She was, cons in that moment, entirely secure in a version of the world that had never once made her answer for anything. That version ended the following morning at 8:15, when a gray sedan pulled into her driveway and a man in a plain suit climbed the porch steps, dropped a thick envelope on the wicker table beside her coffee, and said only, "You've been served," before walking back to his car. Her hands shook as she opened it. Circuit Court, City and County of Denver, Bennett v. Whitfield, defamation, false imprisonment, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and beneath the list of charges, a number that made the porch tilt slightly under her. Damages sought in excess of $9 million. The tea in her cup had gone cold and tasted, suddenly, like nothing at all. 7 weeks later, in a glass-walled conference room on the 31st floor of Sloane, Whitcombe Reyes, Diane Whitfield sat across a long table from the man she had once called a thief, her camel coat replaced by a plain gray blazer, her posture no longer commanding a room, but folding quietly inward. Her lawyer, a solo practitioner out of his depth and visibly aware of it, sat beside her, saying almost nothing. "Let the record show we are beginning the deposition of Diane Whitfield," Sloane said, pressing the recorder. She did not look at the lawyer. Her eyes stayed on Diane. "7 weeks ago, you falsely accused my client of theft, physically assaulted him, and incited a public disturbance that led to his unlawful arrest. Do you deny this happened?" "I made a mistake," Diane whispered. "I thought it was my bag." They looked similar. Priya slid 2 photographs across the table. The steel-edged case beside the battered navy duffel with its pink ribbon. One is a shock-proof engineering case worth roughly $11,000, she said. The other is fabric with a ribbon on it. They share nothing but the word black. Is that truly your defense? That you couldn't tell the difference? Diane flinched as if struck. "You didn't panic," Marcus said, speaking for the first time, and the whole room went still around his voice. "You saw a black man holding something expensive, and some instinct in you decided, before I opened my mouth, that it had to be stolen. You used the police as a weapon, because some part of you knew they would believe your tears faster than my truth. And then, once I was gone, you calmly picked up your own bag and went home. That wasn't a mistake, Miss Whitfield. That was a choice you were used to making without ever paying for it." Diane's composure finally broke. She put both hands over her face, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost every trace of the certainty that had filled a Denver terminal 7 weeks earlier. "I'll apologize publicly," she said. "I'll do anything. This lawsuit will destroy me. I'll lose my house. I'll lose everything I have. You should have considered that before you gambled with my life over a suitcase," Marcus said. And there was no cruelty in it, only a flat, exhausted honesty. "An officer's hand was on his weapon while you were performing for a crowd, Miss Whitfield. If I had moved wrong, if I had raised my voice once, you and I would not be having this conversation right now. Whatever this costs you, it is only the bill for that gamble." Sloane closed her folder. "We are not settling," she said. "This goes to trial. We intend to make this loud enough that it changes how every airport and every witness in this city responds the next time someone decides their fear is more credible than someone else's truth." What followed was not quiet. The footage from Carousel 11, released by the firm's own press office rather than leaked, spread across the country within days. The arrest, the cuffs, the little girl's question about the chains, and Diane Whitfield calmly collecting her own duffel bag, while a man sat handcuffed because of her. Officer Dale Kraft and Officer Renee Ostrander were terminated within 2 weeks, stripped of their pensions, named as co-defendants in a federal civil rights suit. Captain Doyle resigned before the department could force the question. The city, facing a trial it could not survive politically, settled for $18 million, every cent of which Marcus redirected into a foundation named after his mother, the Dorothy Bennett Fund, providing free legal defense to people wrongfully detained across 3 states. And the airport authority adopted a mandatory federal review of every profiling complaint filed in the last 6 years, uncovering 2 earlier, eerily similar incidents that had gone unchallenged for want of anyone with the resources to fight back. The jury awarded Marcus the full $9 million in damages against Diane Whitfield. She sold the house in Cherry Creek within 4 months. She sold her car. She moved in with a sister in Pueblo and, for the first time in her adult life, learned what it felt like to need someone else's forgiveness and not be certain she would get it. In a written statement submitted to the court, unprompted, unrehearsed, read aloud by her own attorney with visible discomfort, she wrote that she had spent 54 years assuming her instincts were simply the truth, and that it had taken losing everything to understand they had only ever been her fear wearing the mask of certainty. It did not undo what she had done. It did not need to. It was, finally, the first honest thing she had said since the night at the carousel. 6 months later, Marcus Bennett stood again in an airport terminal. This time, boarding a flight to a hospital groundbreaking his company had helped fund in his mother's name. He wore the same gray hoodie, the same scuffed shoes. Beside him sat the same matte black case, the long white scratch still visible near the corner, the leather tag replaced now with a new one, his name stitched quietly into the lining where only he would ever need to see it. His mother stood beside him this time, in her good coat, holding his arm, and when the gate agent called their boarding group, she squeezed his elbow once, the way she had every night he used to come home late as a boy, checking that he was really there, really safe, really hers. He didn't need the world to know who he was. He only needed it, finally, to stop deciding who he wasn't. If this story moved something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, standing on one side of that room or the other, hit like so, it reaches someone who needs to hear it tonight. Share it with someone who needs reminding that they are not invisible. And tell me, in the comments, have you ever stood in that terminal, in that silence on either side of it? I read every single answer.